Welcome back to Wichita's Biz That Is, and our guest today, Ben Nelson from the Wichita Public Works Department. We were talking about new sources of water, etc. The city's been working on that for a while. And let's just bring us up to date. Where are we right now?
We started updating or creating a water resources plan last year. We were in the middle of a pretty bad drought that thankfully ended last July and August. Cheney Lake, one of our two water supplies, the one that's most susceptible to drought, thankfully filled back up last summer. But we know long term we're going to need to have water to provide for community growth for decades, the coming decades. And we started this water resources plan, and really that had two goals. Help us figure out what our long-term water demand is going to be. We know it's growing, but what's it going to be in 50 years? That helps us know how much water we're going to need to have. So once we determined what our long-term demand would be, we then identified the whole range of different options for meeting that demand. We could add some very expensive new water supplies. We could have do it all through conservation, where we drastically reduce water demand through rebate programs and cutting outdoor irrigation, those kinds of things. Or we could do a mix of some moderate conservation practices along with some less costly water supplies, knowing of course that new water supply is always an expensive thing, but it really runs the gamut from some information we presented to our city council, where we gave them 9 different options, and some of them were several hundreds of millions of dollars, but we never have to conserve any water at all. To the point where we're today at a place where we've got 2 final options for adding new water supplies that are under consideration.
Well, one of the interesting things here is there's a word that's been used lately and it's gotten very politicized, and it's sustainability. And I think it gets dragged into all kinds of discussions where it doesn't belong. Water, though, probably is a place where you do want to think about whether you have a sustainable supply.
Yeah, I mean, and the whole purpose of our water planning efforts are that we, with our 2 water sources that we currently have, Cheney Lake and the Equus Beds Aquifer, combined with a new source, that we have enough water between those 3 water supplies to meet the demand for the next 50 years. So how sustainable What happens after that is that we do some planning efforts between now and then. We don't get to 49 years from now and then start planning the next one.
I would hope so.
Yeah, it's a normal practice in the water industry to do these detailed water resources plans every 5 years. So we would be doing some more of these as we go along. So hopefully, we get to the point, 2040 or 25 years from now or whatnot, where we can see we're going to eventually need a new supply at, down the road 30 years past that we'll have enough lead time to plan it appropriately.
In terms of the gross amount of water that comes out, it's actually not as much cities as it is rural and farming, is it not? And is that going to have to change, do you think?
Agricultural.
I don't want to get you in the city in a fight with the farmers. But.
Yeah, but you bring up a good point. The agricultural users, the farmers in Kansas, do use a lot of the water that comes out of the underground aquifers here in Kansas, and it's more of a pressing concern, immediate concern up in the western and northwestern parts of the state, where they've been drawing heavily out of the Ogallala aquifer. We have some of the same concerns here in the Equus Beds, our part of the underground aquifer. But it's going to take some long-term work with the ag users, with cities, and with coordinating with the state water office to figure out how exactly to apportion any future water rights to make it sustainable.
Are those relationships improving? I used to be a big fan of something Eisenhower came up with. It was the Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, and he was looking at discussions like that, or about taxes, et cetera, and it kind of fell off now that we have people in Washington and sometimes in Kansas who know more than everybody else and can mandate whatever you're going to do. Are there better discussions today among these different people who are users?
I think the environment is more suited to that now. Governor Brownback has made one of his real really important charges for his administration is to create a 50-year water supply for all of Kansas. That's the
good.
ag users and cities.
That's good.
And so there's really a big push at the state level to make that happen. And so those discussions can occur in an environment that really is geared toward making sure that there's a sustainable water supply for 50 years, not just for agricultural uses or just for cities, but for everybody who uses those sources.
Well, I know in terms of cleanliness of the water, the city gets hammered sometimes by EPA on cleaning it up, when in fact about 97 to 99% of it, of whatever's not good in the river, actually comes from upstream of us, generally farming.
Yeah.
Does that have any real implications on water supply, or is that mostly a cleanup issue?
What you're referring to really doesn't have a lot to do with our water supply. It's on the stormwater side. Drainage and flooding events will wash things like atrazine, which is a chemical that's used for agricultural crops and those kinds of things, and wash those things off of fields, insecticides that wash off of lawns and whatnot, into the storm drainage system, which of course flows into rivers, and that's kind of, I think, what you're referring to. So we've got a program that works through some of those issues.
Yeah, Gary Oborny, you're probably familiar with Gary. I thought he had some really good thoughts on that, where the city gets hammered into forcing people to put in retention ponds on construction projects, when that's really not the source. I mean, the source is this other stuff. And I'm not down on the farmers, by the way. I started on a farm. I'm an Indiana farm boy.
Yeah.
But there are things we could do, and in fact, ways that we could help control some of that.
Yeah, there's source pollution and non-source pollution, or non-point source pollution, which really the former is the one where we can cite that, or federal regulators can cite where it's coming from, like a wastewater plant.
Right.
So that's going to be heavily regulated because that drains into a river. And then there's things where it's just draining in from everywhere, and there you can't point to one specific source or two specific sources, and that's where the best management practices for the stormwater practices get put into place in order to hopefully minimize what flows into our rivers.
Okay, we're going to stop with the stormwater, come back on water, and kind of what our options are, what we can do when we come back on more Wichita's Biz That Is.